Are there any matters that we need to get on the record at this time on behalf of the state?
Yes, Your Honor, very briefly. We anticipate, knocking on wood, getting to the coroner before the afternoon break. I just wanted to put on the record that we intend to introduce exhibits V2 through V20, which are photographs from the autopsy examination itself. I did review those, each of those with Mr. Thomas, the Friday of qualifications. When we had that Friday off, I showed him all of those. Thank you, Ray. And it's my understanding there was no objection to those. I didn't count how many we eliminated, but there were well over 100 photographs. I think that were taken during the autopsy, and we're just using those few. And they all show specific injuries or things of medical significance from the autopsy. So I just wanted the record to be clear regarding that.
Okay. That's your understanding as well, Mr. Thomas?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
Okay, very good.
Other than that, nothing further.
Nothing on behalf of Mr. Parker.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Harper.
Oh, here, do you want these back? Yeah. These other things too. Can I give these back to Lynndsey up there?
Yes.
You want those too?
All rise for the jury. All right, you may be seated, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, everyone. At this time, we will continue with the cross-examination of Ms. Simon. Mr. Thomas, you may inquire.
Good afternoon again, Ms. Simon.
Good afternoon.
Could you explain to the jurors what's the difference between a minor contributor, and major contributor?
So sometimes when we get a profile, it'll be what we call a mixture. So there'll be 2 or more individuals in that profile. And sometimes we can determine who has contributed more DNA in the profile. So they would be considered the major contributor. And then sometimes we also can interpret that minor profile as well, and they would be considered the minor contributor.
So basically what that's saying is that when you do the sampling, there may be more DNA of one type that comes out.
Yes, one individual may be more present in the profile.
Okay. Does that take away from the fact that there are still 2 other individuals involved?
That doesn't take away from the initial interpretation of the number of contributors.
Okay. When you do the YSTR in this case, and you did the curling iron and the blow dryer, were those YSTR profiles compared to any other individuals?
No, they were not.
And I believe you indicated for the folks that the YSTR is a counting form, is that correct?
For the statistic, yes.
For the statistic. And so it's possible that if you tested somebody else's DNA with the YSTR, you could also get another profile?
I would expect if it was a paternal male relative that they could possess an identical YSTR profile.
What about, say, if you tested, say, John Kennedy? Would you get a profile from that?
If I had his reference standard, I should be able to obtain a YSTR profile, yes.
Okay. What about Sean Griggs? If you tested his and compared it to the YSTR that was found on those items, would you get a profile?
If I had a reference standard, I should be able to get a YSTR profile from that individual.
That wasn't done in this case, was it?
I believe that I had, just refer to my report. I did obtain a reference YSTR profile from Jonathan Kennedy.
Was it compared to the two items that I just talked about, the curling iron and the blow dryer?
For the YSTR profiles, they were determined to be uninterpretable, so I did not do any comparisons to that evidence profile.
That was never done, is that correct?
That was never done because it was not interpretable, so I could not do comparisons.
Did you do any comparison in terms of the YSTR, in terms of any other individuals when it came to the vaginal swabs?
May I refer to my notes?
Absolutely.
So YSTR reference standard profiles were obtained from Jonathan Kennedy and John Anderson as well.
Did you do any testing on those?
I did obtain reference profiles from those individuals.
Did you compare those to the swabs that were taken from the vaginal area?
Those were compared to the unknown profile, YSTR profile obtained from the Pepsi can, because that was not consistent with any of the previous reference standards.
What about when you tested the right wrist, 003-A1?
That would be the same as the Pepsi can. That was already consistent with another individual. So the only additional sample that was compared to the other two reference standards was the unknown YSTR profile.
When I looked at your report, it indicates that there was a mixture of at least 3 individuals. Anthony Pardon could be excluded. What I was wondering is, did you test those particular items there with John Kennedy or, say, Mr. Griggs?
Can you tell me what item number you're referring to?
It's 003-A1. It was a profile from the...
Yeah, Anthony Pardon cannot be excluded as the major contributor, and then the minor component was not of sufficient quantity and or quality for comparison purposes.
Okay. So you did not compare that one with anybody else?
Just Anthony Pardon.
Just
and
Anthony?
Anthony Sleet.
Okay. Why didn't you compare it with John Kennedy, or you had his profile there, didn't you?
Because it was already consistent with a prior reference standard that I had run.
When you have one, does that exclude all others?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
So if you have like a profile, you got a profile here, when you did your DNA and you, does that mean that it is exclusive to one? Can it include some other?
For YSTRs, it would be the individual or a paternal male relative of the individual,
It wouldn't go outside of that, is that what you're saying?
not to my knowledge.
You tested some DNA that was gathered from Rachel's fingernails?
Yes,
And the results of your testing was that you found male DNA,
yes.
but it was not suitable for any DNA analysis?
It was not suitable for further analysis, yes.
When you say it's not suitable for further analysis, what exactly does that mean?
That would be the quantity was too small, or there was just too much female DNA and not enough male DNA for us to do, for example, STR testing on it. But usually it's the quantity that is the issue.
So that I'm clear, maybe, I watch too much TV or something, but how much DNA is contained in like just one cell?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the
How
question?
much DNA is in one cell, one human cell?
You would just have, one set of chromosomes in that. So
Just one?
It's a very small amount of DNA.
So when you say it's not, can you take one cell and actually amplify it and get DNA?
It depends. Usually we're talking about higher quantities of DNA, but something that low, it's hard to say.
Okay. So it takes about how much?
Depending on what type of testing you're doing, do you want me to say the number in like picograms or?
I don't think I would understand.
It's a very small amount.
Very small amount. Okay. And so in order for it not to be enough, it's got to be like non-existent.
Very, very small.
Okay. Was that the same situation when you got to the swabs 008-A1, and that's the swab from the right and left nipple?
Yes,
Male DNA was detected, however, it was not suitable?
yes.
How about item 011-1A? Dash A1. Did I mess you up? With those numbers. Let's try again. 011-A1.
We were able to take that forward for STR and YSTR testing.
What was your results of those testing?
So for 011-A1-001, which were the swabs from the unstained heating blanket cord piece,
Yes.
it was interpreted as being a mixture of 3 individuals, and Rachael Anderson cannot be excluded as the major contributor in this profile.
Were those actually tested for John Kennedy? Did you compare his DNA with those?
There were no other unknown individuals from the sample, so there was nothing else to compare to.
There was nothing else? And that's the cords from around the neck?
Oops, I'm sorry, what was that?
You said those were recovered from around Rachel's neck, according to your report?
They were from the swabs unstained heating blanket cord piece.
Okay. What about, did you do, you did that actual testing yourself, is that correct? You actually swabbed it,
Yes, I did.
and do you recall, did you swab the whole cord in that situation?
I swabbed, it was in 2 separate pieces.
Yes.
And one had a lot more staining on it.
Okay.
So I swabbed the one that didn't have as much staining.
So you only swabbed half of it?
Yes, I'm not sure how, I can't exactly recall how big the pieces were, but the half that was the unstained portion was the portion that I swabbed.
When you are given a case, and I think you've already answered this, I just want to go into it a little bit. You're given a scenario or a case summary by the detective,
Yes.
And I think you indicated to these folks that one of the reasons that is done so that you can pinpoint areas in which you want to check.
Yes.
Did the detective give you a scenario where maybe another witness may have touched those cords?
That was not indicated to me, no.
It was not. What was the results of your testing on 012-A1? And tell us what that is, please.
So O2-A1 would be the curling iron with the cut cord. And are you referring to STR or YSTR?
This one is 012, right? A1,
Yes.
and that's the curling iron
Yes.
from the ankles?
I think I have it listed as the curling iron with the cut cord.
Okay.
Yes.
So the curling iron had, the cord was cut on there?
It appeared to be cut.
Okay. Did you take swabs from both sides, or? Because you did that individually yourself, right?
Yes, I did.
You, were you aware that you did some items that came out of automobiles in this case?
I believe so, yes.
You may.
Simon, I don't know if you've seen these. You take a look at those. Sure. You may not have ever seen them before. What are those?
They look like photographs from possibly the crime scene.
Okay. What's in the photographs? Do you?
So this first one looks like it's inside of a car door.
Okay.
And then this one looks like the glass smoking pipe.
Okay. Had you seen them before?
This item I did because this is what we requested for DNA. It was requested for DNA analysis.
So when you say this item, you're talking about State Exhibit D19, the
Yes.
pipe?
Yes.
You actually tested that?
Yes.
And did you test a Pepsi can at all?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And when you tested, may I use them on your honor?
You may.
When you tested D19, what was the results of your testing?
Just want to make sure I have the right item. So I'm going to check my notes.
Oh, take your time.
So our lab evidence number for this was O36-A1, and the swabs were O36-A1-001, and the DNA profile is interpreted as being a mixture of 3 individuals. Rachael Anderson and Jonathan Kennedy cannot be excluded as contributors to the major component in this profile.
Did you, no, let me ask you, did you also do a Pepsi can?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification purposes. State Exhibit D9. Does that look like the can? Or did you ever see it?
I did. We actually did receive that item, and I did swab it for DNA. Yes, this looks similar to the can that was submitted for DNA testing.
What was the results?
So the empty Pepsi can, our lab evidence number was 009-A1, and the swab that I collected from the can was 009-A1-001, and the DNA profile is consistent with an unknown male contributor, who then I was later able to say was consistent with the DNA profile of Jonathan Kennedy.
You don't know whose car that is, do you?
No, I did not process that car.
Okay. Show you what's been marked for identification purposes as State Exhibit U4. I think you identified that. Could you just tell us again what that is?
This is one of the knives that was submitted for DNA testing.
How many knives do you recall were submitted to you for DNA testing?
I believe there were 2.
So I'm going to show you that's U4 and that would have been U7. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you don't recall testing any other knives?
Those are the only 2 that I have in my lab results.
Okay. Going back to U4, what was your results of your testing on State Exhibit U4?
So this would be lab evidence number 026-A1. I collected swabs from the handle, which were 026-A1-001, and then also some staining from the blade of the knife, which was 026-A1-002. Both of those, there was no male DNA detected on either of those samples.
Now, I know in certain situations, you kind of took it upon yourself to test some items, didn't you?
Whatever was requested for DNA, yes.
Okay. And is there any particular reason why you only tested this knife for male DNA?
I believe this one, they requested DNA analysis on it. So we would have taken forward swabs from the knife to check for male DNA.
Okay. But you don't know why they would just limit it instead of just, let me just check for DNA, see if anybody's DNA is on here. That they would just limit this to you checking for only male DNA.
I think in the context of the case, there was, so much staining on this knife that that would be expected there would be a lot of potential female DNA on the sample. So that would be a check for male DNA is a good indication to know if there's even anything that could potentially be helpful or probative in the sample.
So you're saying that because, well, let me ask you this. At the time you tested this, you already knew that they had Anthony Pardon as a suspect, is that correct?
Do you know when that knife was submitted?
Can I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
I believe that would have been after we had a reference standard submitted from him.
Yes. And so that was limited based on the fact that you had a male as a subject of investigation. Is that correct?
There was reason to believe the suspect was male, so we checked for male DNA.
Okay. So instead of doing an actual check to make sure to eliminate, you just focused in on a male.
Yes, because likely if we took that sample forward, we would just get the victim.
Well, you don't never know then, do you? I mean, if you don't test it, how do you know? You just assume that if I do this, this will happen. Ain't that why we do testing? So we can make sure, so when we come in here, we can tell these folks?
That's why we do the screening portion itself, so we know what is in the sample before we take it forward.
Did you do a screening on this?
We did the male screening on this, yes.
Okay. Your Honor, could I have 1 minute?
You may.
You were asked some questions on this route in terms of what could possibly be reasons why some DNA was present and why at other situations DNA was not present. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
And those questions that you were asked, there could be a million reasons why there may not be DNA. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And there could be other reasons why DNA is present. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so that depends on the facts of each case, right?
Yes.
I believe you tested the knife that was found in the car, and we called that U7. Is that correct? You don't know where this was found, do you?
I don't.
Okay. But you tested this item
Yes,
in U7. Is that correct?
that's correct.
There was no blood or no...
It was negative for potential blood.
Okay. And I think you tested several other items that, I think you have a group of items that why STR profiles were conducted on the victim's left wrist swab. May I approach the witness, Your Honor? Probably your part. I help you. I just be,
It's probably all these ones, right?
please.
Oh, yep, yep,
You had that part of your report?
yep, here, and then, yeah, all these items are in this, are grouped here.
Okay.
Yep.
Explain to the jurors what items you're talking about and what the results were, please.
So those would be YO-STR profiles from the left wrist swab, the right forearm swab, the left ankle swab, swabs from unstained heating blanket cord piece, swabs from the curling iron and cord, swabs from the hairdryer and cord, and the swabs from the steam iron and cord. And all of those were not of sufficient quantity and or quality for comparison purposes.
Your Honor, could I have 1 minute?
You may.
Ms. Simon, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Your Honor, thank you. I have nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Redirect.
Oh, yes, yes.
I apologize, Your Honor, may I?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. Okay. I think we need to clear a couple things up here. Who first developed the name of the suspect, Anthony Pardon?
I believe the laboratory did.
Okay. Do you recall when you provided that information to Detective Hughes?
I believe, I can look it up, but I believe it was February 8th of 2018.
Okay. And you, had you already started working on evidence at that point?
Yes.
And as a result of working on that, you provided this information to him based on some investigative tools you have?
Yes.
You had previously told Mr. Thomas, when he was asking you about the knife, not this second one. The last picture I took of. States Exhibit U4, this knife.
Yes.
And he was asking about male screening. You said something like, we had reason to believe the suspect was male.
Correct.
Was that based on the information you got from your investigative tool?
Yes.
And to be clear, is that screening, the male screening, something you do as a normal part of your DNA testing?
Yes.
Is that done on everything you test?
Not everything, but for a majority of cases where you would have a female victim, male suspect.
Okay. In quite a few of the items, Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
I didn't want to take the labs from you. Okay, for example, this item 012A1001, which should be the swabs from the curling iron and the cord. In here, you had told us, this is when we started talking about the 20.5 billion number earlier this morning. And you had said that it was a mixture of 3 individuals,
Correct.
that Rachel was assumed
Yes.
because it's her object,
Correct.
and that Anthony Pardon could not be excluded.
Correct.
Okay, so we have 2 out of the 3 that you have interpreted.
Correct.
Does that make, do I have it right so far?
Yes.
Okay, so far. Now the rest of it says, and you excluded Anthony Sleet, then it says due to the low level of data obtained from the 3rd contributor, no further comparisons could be made.
Correct.
So, is there enough DNA for that 3rd person for you to ever figure out who that is?
No.
Okay. So anytime we see the remainder was not of sufficient quantity or quality, are you ever going to be able to get information from that?
No.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about why STR testing, please. We talked about what I call regular, you scientists like to call STR testing. You're looking at 23 spots that I inherit from my mom and my dad, okay? But the Y looks at the Y chromosome.
Correct.
Can you tell the jury what exactly are you looking at on that Y chromosome?
It's the same type of testing as traditional STRs. It's just you're looking just at the Y chromosome.
How many spots on the chromosome are you looking at?
23.
Okay. So is it something similar where you have to have enough information at a certain number of those 23 spots on the Y chromosome to include or not exclude somebody?
Yes.
Okay. So it's not just looking at one thing, it's looking at 23 points on one thing.
Yes.
Does the amount of DNA left impact your ability to see information at all of those 23 points, even on YSTR?
It can, yes.
And when Mr. Thomas asked you about, you can only make it to a group of people when you're talking about YSTR, do you remember that before lunch?
Yes.
To clarify, when you say group of people, you kept saying paternal male relatives,
Correct.
right? So the group of people, when you say that on the YSTR and her vaginal swabs, it's consistent with his profile, or he cannot be excluded. The group of people is Anthony Pardon, his brother from the same father, his father, paternal grandfather.
Correct.
It's not a group of random men.
No.
Those vaginal swabs, Those are typically collected from inside the body, right?
Yes, correct.
And for somebody else's or foreign DNA to get inside of a body, how would that happen?
It's hard to say.
Okay, would something that contained either skin cells, like a hand, a penis, a body part, or an object that contained bodily fluid from that person have to go into that space?
It would be reasonable to expect that that would be something that would have had to have contacted that area
Okay.
to deposit DNA.
Okay. Mr. Thomas talked to you about transferring DNA. I think the example he said was if I shake your hand, or he shakes your hand, and you touch the bar there. Do you remember that?
Yes,
You might leave some of your DNA, but some of his DNA.
correct.
Do we call that secondary transfer?
If it's coming from you to someone else to an object, yes,
Okay. If it's coming from me to you, that's just transfer.
correct.
From me to you to the object, it's secondary transfer.
Correct.
Okay. Every time that would happen, does that impact your ability to obtain interpretable profiles?
It can, yes.
Can you explain that?
The more distance there is between the original object and the area where you're actually swabbing to obtain DNA, it's less likely that you're going to transfer the more further out you go with that transfer. So primary is the more direct contact. You would expect to get more DNA from something that was deposited with a secondary transfer.
Okay. I live with my husband and my son in the same household. Share things in the household. Am I crawling with their DNA?
Potentially.
Okay, that's gross. Okay. But when we're talking about that kind of transfer, would you expect, for example, on a sexual assault kit where we have vaginal swabs, would you expect to see secondary transfer in a location like that?
It would be less likely to have come from a secondary transfer.
Okay. Now, if I recall correctly in your direct, you had testified that the YSTR DNA in Rachel's vaginal swabs that you had identified as including the defendant, his Y profile, was that a single source or a mixture?
For the vaginal swabs, both fractions were single source profiles.
And if that was some sort of transfer, would you expect to see a single source profile?
It's hard to say if it would potentially be a single source or a mixture.
Okay. But you did not identify a mixture there.
I did not.
I think we kind of got tangled up with sperm fraction and spermatozoa. Was there male DNA inside of Rachael Anderson on those vaginal swabs?
Yes.
And when you checked the YSTR profile, was it consistent with the defendant's or his paternal relatives?
Yes.
When we were talking about YSTR, you had talked about, what was my word? So I'm going to keep using it. The noise. The female body can have a lot of noise because you would be picking up DNA from my body. Okay. And that could potentially happen on items like U4. Even though it's not the body, if I understood you correctly, the amount of blood could overwhelm other DNA.
Yes, the staining could, yes.
The staining could. If you are able to obtain an interpretable profile that is not the victims or the females, so you're able to overcome that noise and get an interpretable male profile, what, if anything, does that tell you about the quantity of the DNA?
That there was likely a sufficient amount to generate an interpretable profile.
You were asked a lot of questions about the counting method and statistics for the YSTR numbers, how you had explained the 0 and 5,305 because you're looking through the database, if I got that right.
Correct.
Is that counting method generally accepted in your scientific community?
Yes.
And is your lab nationally accredited and the methods you used checked in order to retain that accreditation?
Yes.
Can I have one moment, please?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Roush. Recross.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Simon, let's start where you ended, so that, how much has DNA changed just since you started doing DNA?
I mean, it's all ever-evolving field, so it changes a lot.
And the technology that we have today is better than the technology we had in, say, 2005, right?
Correct.
And it gets better and better and better, doesn't it?
Yes.
So if there's a better way of doing things, even though your lab doesn't do it, you wouldn't take away and discount the better way of doing it, would you?
No, I mean, we use all validated and accepted methods within the community in our laboratory, and we're always performing validations on new techniques when they become available.
But the frequency counting that we're talking about, that's a better method than the one you do in your lab right now, right?
Not necessarily. The counting method is generally accepted within the community, so that's the one we use.
What would the frequency method do? Wouldn't that narrow it down for you so that you can get the individual instead of that big group, that group gets smaller?
I'm not familiar with the frequency method, so I wouldn't be able to testify to that.
Okay. As we stand with the technology used in this case, you can't tell the members of this jury that Anthony Pardon DNA was located inside or on any vaginal swab, can you?
I cannot say with 100% certainty that it was his specific DNA. I can say that the profile was consistent, the evidence profile consistent with his reference standard.
And if he had 10 or 15 male relatives in Columbus, just based on your analysis, we'd have 10 or 15 different suspects that could have had on that vaginal swab, right?
Potentially.
Okay. Let me ask you, would it be easier, before I trip and fall, would it be easier to do DNA if you had a bodily fluid, say like sperm?
We would expect to get a good profile from something that contains sperm.
And you did not have Anthony Pardon's sperm in this case, right? I
did not find any DNA profile from a sample with sperm that were identified that was consistent with Anthony Pardon.
And you didn't, I think you said blood was also a good, did you have any of Anthony's blood?
And all the items that were positive, presumptive positive for blood, I did not, those were not consistent with Anthony Pardon.
And so the jury is clear, the swabs that you did get from the vaginal area, what type of DNA was on those swabs?
So the swabs in the vaginal area, we did YSTR testing on those.
Can you tell what kind of DNA that is?
No.
So you don't know if that's touch DNA, saliva, all we know is that it was DNA.
Correct.
So would you have a better idea how it could have been transferred if you knew what kind of DNA it was?
Not necessarily. It's hard to say how DNA was transferred because we're just looking at the DNA profiles themselves. We're not looking at how or when or why it got there.
Well, yeah, if it was sperm out there, you pretty much know how it got there, right?
You could assume.
What about saliva? If you was saliva out there, you would probably get a good idea how it got there, right?
Possibly.
So if you knew what kind of DNA, does that make it more likely that you could tell how it was transferred?
It's hard to say. I couldn't make any conclusive determinations about how it ended up there.
But you're not telling these folks it couldn't have been transferred, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. All right, Simon, you can step down. You cannot discuss your testimony with anyone while this case is still pending. Okay. State may call their next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Oh, thank you. We're going to call Dr. Daniels.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, as you shall answer unto God, under the pains and penalties of perjury?
I do.
You may be seated. Okay, it's important that you speak up loud enough so that the ladies and gentlemen of the jury can hear you. All right, that is a microphone. You have to just pull a little closer to you. Thank you. All right, for the record, if you please state your name, spelling your last.
John, middle initial A, Daniels, D-A-N-I-E-L-S.
Thank you. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Are you currently employed?
Yes, I am.
Where do you work?
I work at the Franklin County Coroner's Office.
What do you do there?
I am a forensic pathologist and deputy coroner.
Do you have any specialized training or education to do that?
Yes. I graduated from Wright State University Medical School with a Doctor of Medicine degree in 1981. I did an internship in surgery and residency in pathology at University Hospitals of Cleveland in the 80s. Did further training in forensic pathology and further training in other specialties of pathology such as blood diseases. And then worked as a forensic pathologist in Lorain County, Ohio, Cuyahoga, Alabama, Indianapolis, and now back in Columbus.
And how long have you worked at the Franklin County Coroner's Office?
Since January of 2012.
You mentioned Cuyahoga. Do you intend to return there upon your retirement?
To Northern Ohio, yes.
Are you counting?
No.
Okay. All right, so you've been with the Franklin County Coroner's Office since January of 2012. How long have you been a practicing forensic pathologist?
Since the end of 1986.
Can you explain for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a forensic pathologist does?
A forensic pathologist is a specialist in pathology. Pathology is a medical specialty that examines body tissues in the hospital and fluids and diagnoses disease by the changes that might be in blood samples or in biopsies or in pap smears. And a pathologist in the hospital does hospital autopsies. Forensic pathology starts with that basic education, and then we are trained in understanding, recognizing injuries that occur, and then relating injuries or other natural causes to determine cause and manner of death in cases that the coroner examines.
Are you licensed to do that in Ohio?
Yes, I am.
And are you current on all of your continuing education?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any board certifications?
Yes, I'm certified by the American Board of Pathology in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
Would you explain for the jury what it means to be board certified?
It means that a national organization, particular for that specialty, has developed criteria for types of training and examinations, types of examinations, all of which you must satisfy for them to consider that you are adequately trained and have an understanding of a body of knowledge of that field.
Does every forensic pathologist have that board certification, or is that something extra you did?
In Franklin County, every forensic pathologist has that board certification. There are pathologists around the country who are practicing forensic pathology who do not.
Okay. Approximately how many autopsies do you think you've performed during your career?
5,000?
Have you ever had to testify in court before?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
Dozens?
Okay. You listed several different places where you've worked. Did you testify in all of those places?
Yes, I did.
And when you testified, were you declared an expert?
Yes, I was.
Your Honor, at this time, we would ask that Dr. Daniels be qualified as an expert in forensic pathology.
No objection.
Okay, the record shall so reflect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Daniels, would you explain the process very generally for the jury when you conduct an autopsy?
Okay. An autopsy is a complete external and internal examination of a deceased person. So we would start, it actually starts when the individual is brought into our office, where they are photographed initially by our morgue staff, and they are given a case number. The case number is the last two digits of the year, and then starting from 0001 on January 1st to how many cases there may be in that year. So every case this year is 20-something. That unique number is on every specimen, every photograph, every report, anything that has to do with that given individual. My part comes and starts with an external examination of the individual. That I will notice their height, their weight, hair color, eye color, markings of any types, any external examples of disease, as well as injuries. And as far as injuries, I will note what type they are and their locations and measure their dimensions. The internal examination consists of opening the chest and abdominal cavities first and examining all of the organs in place and noting again evidence of natural disease and evidence of injuries, and having photographs taken of the external and the internal examination as needed, documenting that and describing it. I will then examine each internal organ individually, again looking for injury or natural disease. We then do the same thing with the brain, where an incision is made at the back of the scalp. The top of the skull is removed with a surgical saw. The brain is removed, weighed, and examined again for natural disease and or injury. We may keep portions of tissue for further examination, and in this process we'll collect body fluids such as blood, eye fluid, gastric contents, urine, or other body fluids as needed, so that toxicology, our toxicology lab can screen for drugs, alcohol, and so forth. After all that is done, the organs are returned to the body, and the body is prepared and sent to the funeral home.
Are autopsies done on every person that dies?
No.
Can you explain what kinds of cases or deaths would come to your office?
Unexpected deaths, deaths involving overdoses, deaths involving suspicious circumstances, deaths involving injuries of any type, whether, whatever their cause may be.
Now, for this specific case, were you personally involved in Rachael Anderson's autopsy?
I was not.
Did we have a request of you?
Yes.
And what was that request?
The request was to examine the report that was made by Dr. Donald Poyman, who did the autopsy, and basically review it and testify to Dr. Poyman's observations in court.
Now, to be fair, I don't want to speak poorly of Dr. Poyman. Did he have some medical issues and is no longer with the coroner's office?
Yes, Dr. Poyman had medical issues and is no longer with the coroner's office.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to review his documentation, the report, and the photographs that he took or someone took during his examination?
Yes, I did.
And did it appear as though he followed that general procedure that you previously outlined for the jury with the external exam and the internal exam?
Yes, he did.
Your Honor, at this time, it might be appropriate for the last stipulation.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, as we've moved throughout the trial, I've provided you stipulations on behalf of the parties. Again, facts that the parties have agreed to. The stipulation that the parties are agreeing to at this point in time is that the parties agree and stipulate that Rachael Anderson, named in the indictment, is the same Rachael Anderson named in the coroner's report, states Exhibit 5.
Thank you, Your Honor. I mentioned photographs. Were photographs taken?
Yes, they were.
And did you review all of them?
Yes, I did.
Did I mark a small portion of them to use here today?
Yes, you did.
And Dr. Poyman completed a report we talked about?
Yes, he did.
You, at the forensic pathologists, do you complete your own reports?
We complete our own reports, and then we sign them out as a group, asking our colleagues whether, how they might interpret something.
And do you prepare your reports at or near the time of your examinations?
We begin that time, and as further lab studies become available, then we complete the report. That could take weeks.
And do you have a duty to report the information in your reports accurately?
Yes, we do.
And does the coroner's office keep it as part of their normal course of business?
Yes.
If I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
I'm going to first show you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit V. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
This is the complete report on Lab 18-0435 on Rachael Anderson.
Okay, now you said 18-0435?
Yes.
And is that number that you previously described for the jurors?
That is the case number, the unique case number for everything concerning this case.
And I think you mentioned that would be on certain photographs and anything associated with this examination of Ms. Anderson.
That is correct.
And does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy of Dr. Poyman's report that you reviewed in anticipation of trial today?
Yes, it does.
Okay. I also have what we've marked for identification as State's Exhibit V1. Can you tell the jurors what this is?
That is a Ohio Department of Health sexual assault evidence collection kit.
And how do we know who it belongs to?
There is a label on it with the case number 18-0435.
Matching Ms. Anderson's?
Yes.
So does this appear to be the sexual assault kit that was collected during her autopsy?
That appears to be so, yes.
Okay. And then I have, as a group, State's Exhibits V2 through V20. Do you recognize those as a group?
Yes, I do.
Did I show them to you before you testified today?
Yes, you did.
As a group, what do those appear to be?
These are photographs of Rachael Anderson at the time of autopsy.
Okay. And these are some of the photographs you reviewed in order to assist us today?
Yes.
When we get to that, I'm going to ask to publish them, and that's a laser pointer there next to you if you need it.
Okay.
actually. I think I'm going to ask to start publishing them, if the court will allow me. We have State's Exhibit V2 up on the screen. Would you explain for the jury what we're looking at in State's Exhibit V2?
We are looking at the upper chest, shoulders, face, and neck of the decedent.
And do we know it's the same Rachael Anderson because of that unique number?
Yes.
Okay. I noticed that the front of her body, or what I would call the front of her body there, appears to be discolored. Can you explain that to the jury, please?
That is livor mortis. At the time of death, all circulation stops. With time, blood in the small blood vessels of the skin and in the organs will settle to the lowest points because of the force of gravity. As it does so in the skin, it will change the skin first from a faint red to a darker red, ultimately to a dark purple. Early on in that process, the blood is still liquid, so you could have someone lying on their back, and if you turn them over, the blood would then follow the force of gravity to the front. Ultimately, livor mortis becomes fixed, and what that means is that the blood in the small blood vessels of the skin coagulates and remains in that position, indicating the position the body was in.
So in this particular instance, the jury has seen photographs of Miss Anderson face down or laying on her stomach with her arms and legs behind her. Would this be consistent with her being in that position?
Yes, it would.
Okay. I also note there is something on her nose.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that, please?
That is an abrasion. An abrasion is a lesion that is caused by something forcibly pulling across the surface of the skin and removing a portion of the epidermis superficial layers. The red is a small amount of hemorrhage.
If there had been something across her nose, like a cord or something like that at the scene, is that mark consistent with that?
Yes.
Okay. Moving ahead to State's Exhibit V3, can you tell the jury what's in this photograph, please?
This is a laceration. A laceration is an injury caused by a blunt force. It has an irregular edge. There is a margin at the edges of the tissues, which are described in the autopsy report. This blunt force injury apparently extends all the way through the scalp, as described by Dr. Poyman, down to the bone.
So when you say extends down into the scalp, what do you mean?
It extends through all the layers of the scalp, the skin and the subcutaneous tissues, down to the bone. It is located, by the way, near the vertex of the head, near the top of the head.
I was just going to say, you're kind of pointing to the top of your
Yes.
head. So the laceration itself goes down to her
Yes.
skull. Okay. And you mentioned it being a blunt impact?
Blunt impact.
How do you know that?
By its appearance and by the description Dr. Poyman gave to me. His description, excuse me. He describes it as there are abrasions on both margins, and there is tissue bridging deep within the wound. This, by definition, makes it a laceration. A laceration is caused by a blunt impact of the skin, not a sharp object, but a blunt object. It causes the tear in the skin by stretching the skin beyond its tensile strength, and then the skin tears.
So some sort of force with a blunt object to
Yes.
the skin.
Yes.
Was there any associated underlying injury?
Yes. Beneath the scalp, there was a hemorrhage associated with this wound that measured in the report 2 by 2 centimeters,
So bleeding underneath.
bleeding underneath.
Was this injury that we see in State's Exhibit V3 enough to kill Rachael Anderson?
No.
What kind of physical impact could this have had on her?
This could stun someone, and I can't really suggest how much it might stun someone, but
That's okay.
it's a blow to the head.
All right. I would like to talk about our next two photographs together, if we could. Well, actually, to make it easier for you, I'll do one at a time. State's Exhibit V4. This looks like it is her left leg.
Yes.
Could you let us know what we're seeing in this photograph and what was documented with regard to her left leg?
This is described as a group of thin erythematous skin depressions. Erythematous is just a medical term meaning reddened skin depressions encircling the ankle and above the ankle. They're depressed, they're reddened, they are horizontally oriented, and they're about a quarter inch in width.
Was there any bruising in that area?
There is some patchy ecchymoses as described. Ecchymosis is a word for bruise. You can see some here, and perhaps here.
What do the, I'm going to use the non-medical terminology, the red depressions and the patchy bruises on her left ankle tell you about what her heart was doing when those were inflicted?
Well, bruises are caused by breaking small blood vessels under the skin, and they will bleed under the skin. If the heart is beating at the time the force to cause a bruise occurs, a bruise will develop, as we've all seen them, red, blue, and eventually disappear over time. If the heart is not beating, there will be no hemorrhage in the skin because there's no active circulation, and there will be no bruise.
Moving on to States V5, taking a look at her right ankle. Can you tell us what, if anything, was found there?
Again, as described, there's a group of depressed erythematous, that is red, skin depressions. Dr. Poyman mentions again there's some patchy ecchymoses, and these are primarily horizontally oriented.
Patchy ecchymoses, patchy bruises?
Yes.
Same question about her heart, still beating in order for that to happen?
Still beating in order for that to happen.
At the scene, the jury has seen that there was a cord around her ankles. Are these marks that we see on both V4 and V5 consistent with something being wrapped around her ankles?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to State's Exhibit V6. And I'm going to do V6 and V7 together since they both appear to be her left wrist. I'll back up for you, Doctor.
Yes.
V6.
Yes.
And then V7.
These are described as several erythematous lines, again, red lines. Here, perhaps here, which are depressed and go around the wrist.
And you had said, I think you used the word, which medical word did you use? I missed it.
Erythematous, they're reddened.
Thank you, reddened. Same kind of question. Would it be reddened if her heart was not beating?
No.
I apologize. No. V8, I think, is this her right wrist? No, left. Sorry, I can't keep my right and my left together. So would this also be just a different view of those marks you were talking about?
Yes, and we can see those marks here and there, and a bruising, area of bruising here.
Okay. V9,
There's the right hand,
sorry.
and it appears to be right hand. And again, these are described as 4 erythematous lines and skin depressions, that is red lines and skin depressions. And on the back of the wrist, there is an erythematous line also.
And V10,
Yes.
same kind of thing.
Same kind of thing, yes.
And again, in order to leave those red marks or bruising, her heart would still have to be beating.
It would.
Now, again, similar to the ankles, the jury has seen some photographs where her hands were bound as well. Are these lines consistent with that?
Yes, they are.
Okay. I would like to move on to Rachel's mouth, if we could. I'm going to look at State's Exhibit V11. Would you let the jury know what we're looking at in V11, please?
What we are looking at are the upper teeth and the upper lip and the gingiva of the upper jaw and the upper lip.
And is there anything of note in State's Exhibit V11?
This is called the frenulum. It is a piece of tissue that extends out like a thin membrane at the top of this space. It's very thin, and it can be torn with injury to the upper lip. What you see here, though, is it is torn. So some sort of force was applied to this portion of the body.
Now, do you see any hemorrhaging or bleeding here?
There is no hemorrhaging at this site.
What, if anything, does that tell you medically?
It tells me that when this tissue was torn, the deceased did not have any active circulation. She was dead.
If there was evidence from the scene that she had an object or pantyhose in her mouth, would that be consistent with that injury?
Yes, it could be.
Could be other things.
Yes.
Okay. But because there's no hemorrhage, it would have been after death?
After death.
How about State's Exhibit V12?
This is the lower teeth, lower lip, and on the mucosal surface, we see these hemorrhages. What that represents is the lower lip being forcibly pressed against the teeth. So you could think of these as bruises on the inside of the lip. They occur when there is active circulation.
So pre-mortem, before death?
Yes, before death.
What kind, I apologize if you said that, what can cause those kinds of injuries?
An impact
I'm sorry.
or
Your Honor.
You mind if we take a quick break?
Not at all. All right, we're going to go ahead and take our afternoon break at this time. Okay. Again, ladies and gentlemen, remember the admonitions that I've given you with respect to discussing this case among yourselves or with anyone else. All rise for the jury. You may be seated, everyone. I'll be back in about 20 minutes.